Hello, everybody. Happy Friday to everybody. It's time for Cub Chat Live. Angelique, how are you doing today?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing great. My name is Aaron. You guys know me. You probably also know Angelique over there. Angelique is the communications chair of the National Scouts-BSA Committee. She was on with us last week. Gina and Angelique had a great conversation about the Webelos-to-Scouts-BSA transition from the perspective of den leaders. What can a Webelos den leader do to help that out? We're going to talk about that same topic today from a slightly different perspective, the perspective of the parent. And I might just say real quick, Angelique, as we get started, I've got some experience with this as a parent whose son went from that Webelos Arrow of Light stage into Scouts BSA. I was there for those early Scouts BSA meetings, those early campouts. It's a little bit overwhelming, I'm not going to lie to you. So I'm really excited to talk about this topic today. So excited that I actually wrote a blog post about it. Our behind the scenes Brian is going to post that link in the comments. You guys can read that at any time. But as we get started, Angelique, give us just maybe reset the basic. We're talking about Cub Scouts, 5th grade,
Sure.
as they transition into Scouts BSA. Kind of give us an idea about the basic differences and what that's all about.
Sure. So not only do I serve on the Scouts BSA program committee, I too was a den leader and had my children cross over to a troop. And I too was like, oh my goodness, what is going on here? This is very different than Cub Scouts. So there's a few things that we can keep in mind as parents, and that makes sure we understand that will help ease that transition a little bit for a parent. The biggest change between Cub Scouts and Scouts BSA is that the Scouts become the leaders in Scouts BSA. And we did touch on this last week, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about it. But in Cub Scouts, you get really used to, okay, the adults are setting the meetings. The adults are running them, planning the meetings. They're getting everything for the meetings. They're running the meetings. They're making all the communications that need to happen between the other adults. When they get to Scouts BSA, that's when the kids become the leaders and they're practicing all those skills. So it can be a little jarring when you are seeing what's happening when your scout goes over to a troop. So the couple other things that we discussed last week are how dens make up a pack as to patrols make up a troop. So we think about the dens and have a den leader who's an adult and they lead the den, and then the dens make up the pack. On the troop level, same kind of idea, except the patrols are not necessarily by age or rank. So you can have mixed ages in your patrol. And then the scouts themselves are the patrol leaders instead of having an adult for the den leader. So I think the biggest thing to remember is the adults are the ones who are providing that active supervision. And then there's scaffolding, we talked about that, scaffolding and mentoring for the youth, as the youth are the ones who are learning to lead. So that's some of the biggest differences between the pack and the troop.
Awesome. Very, very cool. I want to give a quick shout out to some of our viewers. Rusty is watching from Pack 84 in New Philadelphia, Ohio. We've got Wendy from Pack 38 and Troop 38. So Wendy probably knows a thing or two about crossing over. They're involved in both units. So would love to hear your thoughts, Wendy, on how that experience has been for you. We've got a person watching from India. I apologize. I'm not going to try to pronounce that name because I'll never say it right. But we are glad to have you watching from India. I think we have a lot of international viewers on this show sometimes, Angelique. We appreciate that very much. Rob weighs in with a thought. He says when his son crossed over from Cub Scouts to Scouts BSA, he took a step back and did not become a troop leader, at least not right away, which I think is probably a pretty smart move. And maybe if you have any hesitation, excellent. And Todd says he's talking to us watching us from Troop 601 in Farmingdale, New York. He's an assistant scoutmaster. Thank you, Todd. Thank you, Jeremy. And Christine says from Pack 100 and Pack 100B, Troop 100B, they just crossed over their third son. So they have 3 sons that have crossed over. Wow, that's awesome, Christine. I'd love to hear more about that experience. If you guys have any questions for Angelique, we've got her for the next 25 minutes or so as we continue to talk about this topic. Okay, so we've established kind of the basics, I think, Angelique. Thank you for that kind of brief recap and filling us in on the basics of the difference. I remember as a parent, one of the biggest difference to me was that, when they're in Cub Scouts, they're going to get, let's say food. They're going to get fed because you're the one doing it.
Right.
You know they're going to get snacks because you're the one that brought them. Scouts BSA, you don't have that same feeling. So while maybe it's less work in that sense, you've got to get used to that sort of different mindset, I think, right?
Sure. Yeah.
Right. So as a Cub Scout pack, as a Cub Scout mom or dad is looking for a Scouts BSA troop to join, okay? Some troops, I think, sort of feed into a Scouts BSA troop with no questions asked, right?
Not,
Okay, well,
not
I would love to hear your thought.
exactly.
Okay,
Not
excellent.
exactly.
Tell us how that works, Angela.
So, some areas have a custom of a feeder pack,
Right.
and that's where, they may have the same number, and then it's just assumed that you're going to go from that pack to that troop.
Mm-hmm.
I want to discourage people from just assuming that you have to go to a certain troop. You really need to find the troop that best suits your family's needs, and it may be after visiting that, yes, the feeder pack is the one that fits your needs, but you don't know until you experience the culture of some of the other troops in your area. So there may be only one in your area, there may be 5 in your area, and it's really important that we visit those troops with our scouts, with our kids, and find the best fit for our kid and for our family. So there's a bunch of things that we can do when we're visiting those packs to help us, or those troops, excuse me, to help figure out if they're a good fit or not. And one of those is by attending both troop meetings and campouts with the troop. And then when you're there, you start asking yourself questions and asking other parents questions and asking the leadership of the adult leadership of the troop. Ask them, observe how many scouts are in the troop, how many are actually active that are in the troop, when you're watching, who's leading the meetings? Is it the youth or the adults? And are those meetings, are they made up of different parts? Or is it someone standing up and talking at the youth for the whole time? Or are they having like patrol corners and activities and doing fun stuff too? So those are some questions that you can ask. But you can also ask other questions like, okay, how many of your adult volunteers are position trained? And that might be lead to some interesting questions. Ask to see their event calendar. Ask to see what they have planned for summer camp. See how many times they go camping a year, and see how things are communicated to both the troop, to the scouts, and if they communicate to the parents and how they do that. And those all will be slightly different depending on which troop you go to. So everybody's comfort level is different, and find the best fit for you and your scout.
So Angelique, you and Gina, I think, addressed this a little bit last week. By visiting troops and by camping with troops, the Webelos Scouts are satisfying one of their requirements. They're actually getting, so that's a part of their advancement. That was in the Den Leader discussion last week. As a parent, it's helpful to go to these things for the reasons you just said. Right. And correct me if I'm wrong. There's a good chance that as you go to these things, your Webelos Scouts will be interacting with the older Scouts. Hopefully, that's the idea, and that will free you up as a parent. You shouldn't feel the need, correct me if I'm wrong, to be too hands-on with your child in that. Your job is not to, right? So what a great practice right there to sort of get an idea for the parent of, okay, this is what it's going to be like. And I love the idea of maybe asking some of the parents or leaders of the Scouts BSA unit, hey, what's the training like for Scouts BSA? And hopefully they'll be able to tell you and know all these, but these are different things you can look for, right?
Yeah, absolutely. You don't have to, you hopefully will be going with your den to go visit the troops and the meetings and the campouts, but you can go as with your scout as a family.
That's a great thing to point out.
Contact a troop and say, hey, we weren't going to come with our den, but can we as a family come and observe a troop meeting? And hopefully they will invite your scout to participate, and they'll say, what questions do you have? And they should absolutely be happy to have you there and be able to answer some of your questions.
That's a great point. I'm really glad you said that, Angelique. When I was, again, an RDN leader, a lot of the parents starting off that last year, they all just kind of assumed, we talk a lot about on this show about what folks who don't know scouting, what they assume. They don't, necessarily understand the things that is second nature to us. They just assume the entire den would stick together in 7th, 8th, 9th, all the way through. And I said,
Right.
not necessarily. I mean, maybe we could all choose the same troop.
Mhm.
And I think I had 2 or 3 different troops that we visited, but I also said, hey, if you guys hear of any troops, you're welcome to go on your own. And we had several families who,
Yeah.
found different troops that they wanted to join, and that is totally, totally fine. So I'm really glad you brought that up. I want to give a quick shout out to Luke from Pack 21 in Chittenango, New York. Angelique, I'm not familiar with Chittenango. I'd love to know where that is. Thank you for watching, Luke. We appreciate it. Philip is the Cub Master of Pack 3370 in Kansas, their largest den, 50-50 girls and boys. When looking at troops, what role does everyone in the den being able to go to link troops play? So I think what Philip is asking there, if you have boys and girls, right, they're going to go to a links troop, maybe.
No, not necessarily.
But not necessarily,
So,
exactly.
yeah, not necessarily. So linked troops refer to the committees being linked. How much the troop youth interact is totally up to the youth. So a troops can be linked by their committee and still meet entirely separately from one another. So it's not necessarily, you don't have to go look for linked troops because they might not even meet on the same night. Some of them do, which is okay, and that's cool, and that might be convenient. The key is to go find those units for those scouts. So go find the units for the female scouts, go find the units for the male scouts, and let them visit all of them. And just because it's a linked troop might not necessarily mean it's the best fit for the pack.
Yeah, the linking, Philip, could happen behind the scenes, be something that as a parent, you would never even know they were linked, right? They might have the same number,
Correct.
the B or the G.
They could even have a different number and still be linked.
Okay.
There are many forms of linked troops. So don't assume that they're going to meet on the same night and have joint meetings just because they're considered linked.
And I think what Angelique is also saying, correct me if I'm wrong, you don't necessarily have to find a linked troop. You
Correct.
could find your girls in your Cub Scout pack could move on to a certain different troop, and the boys could go on to a completely different troop that's not linked.
Yeah, there's nothing preventing, just like there would be nothing preventing for two boys to go to 2 different troops. If it's a boy and a girl, they go to different troops. A girl and a girl could go to 2 different troops. It just depends on what's in your area.
Yes, excellent, very, very good. John, that makes a good point. John is a Webelos leader and an assistant Cub Master from Pack 340, and he says that he's found a lot of Scouts-BSA units have an open house type place where that's specifically designed to invite Cub Scouts to join. I think that's a thing, right?
Yeah, that definitely is a thing. And one thing to keep in mind is that they're holding an event, especially for Cub Scouts. So yes, it's a great time to go because they're likely going to have activities that your son or daughter can participate in. However, it also is a really good idea to go to a normal, regular old troop meeting.
Well, that's another good point.
Yeah.
Well, that's a great point, Angelique. It's great that they have an open house where they always put their best face forward, right?
Right.
But you want to see how it works on a day-to-day basis. What a great, this is why we have Angelique, guys, for things like that. Excellent. Okay. So we talked about the differences between Cub Scouts and Scouts-BSA. We talked about the advantages of visiting multiple troops, more than one, going to a meeting and maybe a camp out. The next topic you have for us today, Angelique, building independence. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so it can be a challenging transition because you have this child who is 10, 11 years old, and you go from parents and other adults are leading all the activities, and then you're putting them into a troop, and suddenly they're going on a camp out, and it's 20 degrees, and they're expected to cook their food and pitch their tent, and you're like, oh, my kid is not ready for that. Right. Yeah. So it's scary. And I mean, I remember being there and thinking, oh, my kid is not going to survive this.
Absolutely.
But, so there are some things that, I have learned in the last 8 years that I've been involved in my troop. That you can do as a Cub leader or a Cub parent to help ease that transition into a troop. And we talked a little bit about this before, but start asking those leading questions. So instead of grabbing their things for them and saying, okay, let's go to your den meeting, ask them, what do you need for your den meeting? Let's list it out. What do you need? And then have them think through it, because the act of thinking through it, instead of mom saying or dad saying, here you go, here's what you need, that will help a lot because they're starting to form those pathways. Oh, I need to think about what it is I need to bring. My other big one for their first, either for the campouts that you're planning with your den to be with a troop, or to their first camp out with the troop, don't pack their gear for them. And this is a hard one. And as a mom, you're like, oh, it's cold. They're going to be cold. They're going to be, wet. They're going to, they're going to need their favorite blanket or whatever. Help them lay out the content like on their bed or on their bedroom floor. Make sure, help talk them through what do they need. Make sure that it's all there, but let them pack it into their bag themselves. And you say, okay, why is it a big deal? Why can't I can put it into their bag and it fits better, and then it just gets done faster. Well, the key is, if they don't see it and put it into the bag themselves, they have no idea that it's in the bag. And we know this from experience.
Yes.
Yeah, so we had
that, Angelique.
My favorite story as an adult has been, the summer camp where the kid, his socks, he's coming on the last day of camp, his socks are just a hot mess. They're awful. They're like the worst socks I've ever seen. They stink wise or smelled. And he's like, yeah, I didn't pack. I don't have any socks in my bag. And we were like, I'm pretty sure you have socks in your bag. And so, long story short, we ended up going through, and there they were, 7 fresh pairs of socks, all rolled up nicely in a plastic bag that mom had packed, and he had no idea what was in the bag. So it's really important that you let them pack their gear. Doesn't mean you don't observe, but let them pack their gear. The other big thing is help them learn how to manage their gear. So I would say sleeping bags are one of the things that just like the kids lose their cool over the most. Getting that sleeping bag rolled back up to go home. Yep, there are so many that get shoved in a plastic bag, and some of them get upset and will cry over not being able to manage their sleeping bag. The secret is teach them to stuff it into their stuff sack. So if the sleeping bag doesn't have a stuff sack, go get a stuff sack. They don't have to roll it. They just cram it in there, and have them practice that at home a few times so that they get really familiar with it. Same with tent setup, same with sleeping bag or a cot. Have them practice at home with you before they get over there. It'll make their first camp out a lot more smooth. So a couple other little things. Have them label everything with their name. I mean, I have a scout who lost bed sheets in the middle of camp. I don't know how, I don't know why, but he lost bed sheets in the middle of camp. So label it, because that will help it get back to the scout. And then other is practice tenting independently. It can be hard in Cub Scouts and to Scouts-BSA. You're not allowed to tent with an adult anymore. So in Cubs, if you are able to get your hands on another tent, have them set their tent up touching yours and practice. Maybe put the window down so they can see in to your tent as a Cub to get comfortable with it, and you can talk right between, but have them practice that skill so it's not so scary when they cross over to a troop.
Excellent tips, Angelique.
Yeah, it can be really hard as a parent to not worry about them. Some of these little things, they're just little, but they make it a whole lot smoother and help you feel a lot better and help the scout feel a lot better too.
Awesome. I want to mention real quick a question from Richard. It's a tiny bit off topic, but I think it's a good question. And I think, Angelique, you are uniquely qualified to answer this. Richard's question is from the role of the Scouts-BSA troop and leaders as they are welcoming Cub Scouts and these new members in. What are some of the things they need to focus on? I think that's a great question. It's kind of a different angle, but can you take a second real quick to address that?
Yeah. Oh, gosh. I think, there's so many things we could talk about. I think making sure that it's really clear that you communicate to parents pathways of communication, because honestly, so much friction comes from pathways of communication. Where am I going to find out this info? What if my scout forgets to tell me? What's my backup way to know what's going on? That's a big one. And then the second one would be anything to do with money. Like are we a fundraising? Do we fundraise? What do we do for fundraisers? How do we handle money in the troop? Do I have to pay dues? How much is camped? Is there anything we get to do save for camp? Money is a hot button issue, so we want to be really clear about that. And then finally, I think it's really important to discuss with parents and let them know that if they have questions, who to ask in those, what person to ask in the troop to get those questions answered. Because the troop might have a new member coordinator, which is awesome. That person can help with that. But it might be the committee chair might be the best go-to person, or it might be the scoutmaster. Make sure they know who their person is to ask questions, because they're going to have a lot of them when they start.
And boy, that's a great point, because when you join a brand new Scouts-BSA troop, you've got all these new adult leaders. You don't really remember, okay, which one are you again, and what do you do again?
Yeah.
Great to have one whoever that is, right?
Yeah,
one person that they go to.
Yeah.
If it's someone who has taken the title of new member coordinator, that's great.
Right.
In some cases, it might be the committee chair who volunteers to do that. Yeah. And I would just add to that, Richard, I think that maybe one of the common concerns of a Cub Scout parent who's sending their now young Scouts-BSA child off camping for the first time, is just to reassure them on how prepared you are, right? How, you're following the handbook, you're doing everything by the rules, you're all trained. A lot of the questions that Angelique said, of the things that you should ask your new Scouts-BSA leaders, are some of the things a Scouts-BSA leader in turn could flip around and just as part of your presentation, all of our leaders are trained. We know how to handle bad weather. What if it rains? Don't worry. We've got it under control, basically. I think maybe a lot of parents just want to know their kid's going to be okay, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think especially I live in the Midwest, and, February during crossover and the first camp out is usually in February, March, and it's still cold out.
Yeah, totally.
Parents are afraid to send their scout on that camp out. And we like to reassure them and tell them, we're front country camping. We're dragging a trailer with us. In our trailer, I have a heater, I have tarps, I have extra food, I have extra blankets, I have like 8 extra sleeping bags, and I have everything we need to keep them safe, even if they forget something really important. And then I have had the training, we've had the medical training to handle these types of things. And here's our emergency plan. And that helps parents feel a whole lot better.
Yes. Totally. I think Jennifer has a really good point. She says that her younger son ended up going to a different troop than his brother because it was just a different fit. And that's a great point too. Yes. I've heard of that quite a bit during my time in the magazine division. I hear about siblings who are in 2 different troops just because whatever reason, one personality was better in a different troop. That just is an example of how, almost every Scouts-BSA troop is great, but they all have different personalities. Right. It's like people.
Right. Never know. And it's okay to change. Like if one doesn't fit, if you start at one and you spend 6 months there and say, oh, my kid is not happy, go to another one.
Absolutely.
Find a good fit. Yep.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Bridget says that her son forgot a sleeping bag once. Never again. Thank you, Bridget. All right. So we've got a few more topics we have to get to here with Angelique before we let her go. This is an interesting one that you put on your list, Angelique. Scouts who are differently abled. Can we talk about that and how that factors in?
Yeah, absolutely. So there are differences between Cub Scouts and Scouts-BSA for scouts that are differently abled. In Cub Scouts, the motto is do your best. And so things can be adapted at the den level, at the pack level to make sure that the scout can meet the requirement. In Scouts-BSA, the requirement must be completed as written, which sounds really harsh. However, most rank activities and merit badges are worded in a way that provides a lot of flexibility. For example, if something says list, it doesn't mean the scout has to list it themselves. It means they could have an aide listed. It means they could use a computer. It means they could list verbally. There's lots of different ways that they can meet the requirement. There are some requirements that the scout may not be able to meet for rank just because of limitations. And these could be visible or invisible disabilities. So we're talking everything. We could have talk about autism or ADHD or sensory, or we could talk about wheelchair use or other physical difficulties that make things challenging to complete. In the case that they cannot complete the advancement as written in Scouts-BSA, we have a pathway for that to be adapted so that the scout can succeed. Because every scout should be able to rank advance. So if the scout cannot meet the advancement as it's written, they go through council. This is not something that's done at the troop level. They go through council and they ask for an individual scout advancement plan. This plan, they work with their medical personnel, like the Scouts medical providers, and they work with the council's advancement team to find a requirement that is equally challenging to the Scout, but is surmountable, meaning they are able to do it. So it might be subbing out one of the requirements for something slightly different that the Scout's able to achieve. So that's something to keep in mind. That's a possibility to do for a Scout who's differently abled. But again, it's not something the Scoutmaster has any say over. It has to go through the council to be approved. So it sounds a lot like an individualized education plan, an IEP through school, but keep in mind that Scouting is volunteer-based. And so as a parent, or if the Scout already has a private aide, you may be the person that needs to go with the Scout to help them complete the adventure or complete the rank requirement. So that's a case by case, because everybody's different. Every disability is different, and you work directly with your council to help find what meets your Scout's needs best.
And I would also suggest, and you mentioned this, visiting multiple troops to find the best fit. I spoke one time with the father of a Scout with different abilities, and he told me that they visited a couple of troops, and of course everyone's very nice and everyone wants to be welcoming, but it was the third troop, I think it was, that just for whatever reason they were just, let's do this. They opened their arms and ready to embrace a differently abled child that they had no experience with it, but they were just really eager to tackle it head on, and it worked out great. If I remember, the young man earned the rank of Eagle. So very inspiring story. Definitely there is a path there, right?
Oh, absolutely. 100%. And you just need to find the troop that is able to work with you to have the best experience for your Scout.
I almost called you Christine because I'm looking at the comment from Christine, going back to our discussion earlier. She says letting them pack on their own means they won't forget anything the next time. She makes sure they bring their meds, which is a good point there. That's something that you really can't do without. Good point there, Christine.
And like I said, it's not necessarily that you're not checking. You can check. Just let them pack it themselves so they know where it is in the bag.
Jerry has a good question. Webelos and Arrow of Light Scouts is kind of the transition period in the Scouts-BSA 4th and 5th graders. The scouting adventure, is that something generally that you wait until 5th grade to do?
So that is the last 6 months of scouting is their Arrow of Light. That's an adventure. It would be during their Arrow of Light period, their last 6 months in Cub Scouting, where they're going to work on that. Doesn't mean you can't visit troops while you're a Webelos, but you can, that's where the focus is on that last 6 months.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Jerry. Appreciate that. All right. So our last topic of discussion for today, understanding the purpose of Scouts-BSA, something that certainly Cub Scout parents, kind of like I said before, I'm always surprised by no fault of their own. They're not as familiar with it as you might think they are. I had a friend one time who thought that the whole thing was just Cub Scouts all the way up, So what is the purpose of Scouts-BSA?
So, I mean, when we think about Scouts-BSA, we think, tying knots and building fires and going camping. That's not the point. Those things are fun, but it's not the point. Then we think about attaining rank and merit badges and reaching Eagle. And those are great, but they're not the point either of Scouts-BSA. So the purpose is to guide your Scout to be a responsible, participating citizen and leader who is guided by the Scout oath and law. And that comes straight from the vision of Scouting. Okay, so that's like the official vision statement. What does that mean? We're working on character development, leadership development, citizenship training, and personal fitness. So those 4 things are the whole point of Scouting. And we use things like the outdoor program, like learning to tie knots, like going camping, like learning merit badges, like attaining Eagle, to teach those things. So that is what's really important to keep our focus on as a parent, because we can get caught up in, oh, my kid's so behind in their rank, or, my kid has 8 unfinished merit badges, or my kid's got all the merit badges, or those aren't the point. The point is we're helping these kids grow into amazing human beings. So if we can maintain that idea in our head about what the actual point of Scouting is, and sit back and let them experience it, let them choose their interests in Scouting, let them do what they are passionate about in Scouting, and allow them to make mistakes and learn from those mistakes in scouting. That's the whole point. That's why we do what we do. That's what Scouts-BSA is all about.
Awesome. Awesome. I couldn't have said it better myself. And I mean that literally. I really couldn't have said it better myself. So excellent job, Angelique. I want to point out real quick, a lot of good discussion in the comments. A lot of folks sharing their opinions, asking questions. Richard, who asked a second ago about what a Scouts-BSA troop can do. Wendy, one of our viewers, provides an answer. Their troop does indoor equipment inspections every meeting to sort of get the younger scouts used to that Scouts-BSA equipment on their own. The older scouts guide the younger scouts through the tents, practice setting them up, taking them down indoors in a controlled environment, right, where they can get used to it with the lights on. You don't bring it after dark. I think that's a great idea, Wendy, and a great way to kind of get them used to what they're going to be doing soon, probably outdoors, right? So, and what Christine has made a great closing comment. We got to go out on this one. The scout-led portion of Scouts-BSA is the best part. I agree with that 100%. Angelique, is there anything else we need to address before we let you go today?
I think we covered a lot. There's always more to talk about. All I can say is keep tuning in to both Cub Chat Live and Troop Talk Live, and you're going to learn some great stuff. We're going to have some great conversations.
I agree with that 100%. Also, we're on the same page today. Thank you all for watching. And again, I want to remind everybody, if you missed part of our video, it will stay here on this page forever. Share it with your friends, share it with your buddies, forward it to your other Scout parents if you'd like to. We would love that. We appreciate it very much. Angelique Phillips says great advice, and I agree. Great advice, Angelique. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
Have a good weekend, everybody. We will see you next week.
Bye.
Bye.